All of our files are free and will remain free. If you like the show, you can show support by donating $1 to help with expenses. Just use the PayPal link on our website, YouTube channel, or Facebook page. Thanks.
And welcome back to part 2 of the Elemental show we have with you today with our guest, Timothy Hogan, who's become a regular by now. Third time,
it's a good show to be a regular on.
Oh, yeah. You're one of the pioneers.
That's right.
Because what I love with today is that you have a good mic. And remember the Templar show we did?
Oh, yeah.
It was horrible. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
It sounded like you were abducted in some kind of oil tanker at the bottom of an oil tanker.
That's awful. Yeah, I got a nice digital mic that works good now. So.
Yeah, and the Noises show didn't have too good of a sound either, but that's not your fault because we were amateurs back then. I had a bad mic and we didn't know how to clean up the sound or anything. So this is the first show with you that I think will be a decent listening on the air.
That's great.
And air, of course, the fifth element.
Yeah, that's right.
We can't take that too lightly. We'll get back to the fifth element later.
Okay. Yeah.
So what's good here is that because we agree about the bottom line, you talk about your book and the contents, and I, from the sideline, corroborate with aspects that's probably not mentioned in the book that just add to the interview, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. It's perfect. Yeah.
Which is fully in line with your stuff anyway. So
yeah.
Now, I wanna help them understand the nature of the elements, because the beautiful thing with the elements is that you don't really have to read a lot of books to understand them if you can recognize the principles. And I believe everyone can. Why? Because it's a part of us, like we've given example of.
It is, yeah. It is.
From our bodies to our mind, and it's a part of the structures around us. And so everybody has an innate potential.
That's right.
To realize it.
That's exactly right.
And I think also whatever you're working with out there, you should take on the elements as a basic thing. You, for example, get Timothy's book, because it's going to be relevant in most approaches to anything, not just philosophical, even practical.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it helps you to understand the symbolism that's being utilized in sacred texts from around the world, because they all use the same language related to the elements. I mean, the easiest example is the New Testament, with ideas of Jesus walking on water, with this miracle of walking on water. And if you understand what the water represents, which is really the idea symbolically relates to how do we stand on our emotions. This miracle, quote unquote miracle, is more some symbolism, saying how do you stand on your emotions and use them as something to lift you up, as opposed to drowning in them, Mm-hmm. Or him calming the tempests, and where it was said, Jesus said, those who came before baptized with water and air, I've come to baptize with fire.
That's right.
That's right. If you understand these things, what they mean, it takes on a much deeper meaning. So
yeah, it's like a key to decode much of the poetic and metaphorical stuff out there.
That's right.
And you've given two beautiful examples now, one from Egypt and one from the Bible.
Yeah, and it's in all texts. I mean, the Buddhist texts, you find the same elements being used. You find it in the ancient Greek traditions and the mythology and.
Yeah, I'll give a better example there. You have the quadrivium The quadrivium and the trivium are the ancient ways of teaching. It's superior to anything. I don't know why we're not practicing it in school anymore. Oh. But there you have the
seven liberal arts and science.
Yeah, together. Yeah. But there you have the astronomy, the moving, you have the static, which is geometry, you have relative, which is music, and you have absolute, which is arithmetic. But I'll divide it like this. This is from the Pythagorean mystery school. You have mathema, as in the word mathematics, which is general number science, which you could call quintessence. Then you have arithmos techne, which is number in itself. I would say put that as fire, because it's causal. Then you have musikos, or you could say therapeia or harmonia, which is numbers in time, which I would say is water. Then you have geometria.
Right. Literally earth.
Yep, measuring of earth.
Right.
Yep. Now that's number in space. And then you have astron, nomos, which is number in time and space, obviously air. So that's one example. And of course, Plato is known for something that I was amazed to see, that science, physics, quantum physics had discovered that the smallest layer of matter, there they find structures which are identical to the so-called
Platonic solids.
Exactly. Could you give us a briefing on their elements?
Yeah, sure. So, Plato, he divided he said that all creation was made up of these four elements, but they had geometric form. And so Earth was associated with the hexahedron, which is like a cube. Mm. The water was represented by the icosahedron, which is basically made up of a bunch of triangles to form this shape. And then air was associated with the octahedron, which is an 8-sided object.
And number 8 in the Tetractys is also air, by the way.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's right. And then fire, which is it's associated with the tetrahedron, which was the 4-sided object composed of 4 triangles coming together, making
That's 12 all in all.
So it's 4.
4 times 3, right?
Yes, correct. Yeah, correct. It's 3. It's 4 triangles, 4 equilateral triangles, which create 4 points and 6 edges.
Mm. And 12 is also the complete system of vibrations.
That's right. Yeah, each triangle is 60 degrees, which is 180 degrees per triangle, multiplied by 4, that gives you 720 degrees for the solid itself. So there was a mathematics that he incorporated for each.
Hey, you forgot one. The dodecahedron.
Oh, correct. Yeah. Which would be fire.
No. You said fire. That's tetrahedron. It would be the 5th element.
I mean, that's what I meant. I meant the quintessence. Yeah, the ether.
Right, quintessence. Yeah.
And it's interesting too that they found Neolithic carvings of these Platonic forms. Mm-hmm. Going back way, 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 way back into the Stone Age. And yet,
wow.
Plato continued to pass on these ideas, but, of course, Plato was really studying it within the Pythagorean schools. I mean, these were ideas that Pythagoras were.
Plus, he went to Egypt.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And you find these ideas incorporated within the geometry of the Egyptian temple reliefs and architecture, and Schwaller de Lubitz.
Great author.
Yeah, really good stuff. So
yeah, and you mentioned the Greeks. Obviously, we also have in basic geometry, right? We have point, line, plane, and solid.
correct.
Which corresponds obviously to the Platonic solids. I mean, everything is built by this. And of course, people point is fire, and you go down the list, and we end up with solid as earth. Now, I think we should help them understand the principles of each of these principles. And in alchemy, they have a very, very good explanations for it. Could you help us that?
The principles for the
for the qualities of each element.
Well, yeah. Well, some of that really goes back to Aristotle, but it basically said that if you combine the elements, you can get different natures. So, like, if you combine fire and earth, for example, you get dry conditions. Mm-hmm. If you combine earth and water, you get cold conditions. If you combine water and air, you get wet conditions. Mm. And if you combine fire and air, you get hot conditions. Mm. So, just as these natures manifest through the combination of these elements, you can also use the opposite to balance things out. So just as so fire and air gives hot conditions. If you want to make things cooler, then you have to use earth and water, right? I mean, so they're the opposites, or
masculine and feminine. You can also manipulate by that, by the polarity.
That's right.
So if you put them up in a square, you could kind of say that the diagonal, you could put these four qualities you mentioned in the diagonals, and then you get interesting thing that fire relates to hot and dry.
Correct. Yeah.
Air to hot and wet, water to cold and wet, and earth to cold and dry. And that, people, is a clue to understanding them, because if you say that hot and dry equals plus, and cold and wet equals minus, then you'll see that fire is double plus, water is double minus, which is logical because they are two sides of the same coin. That's the, you could say that's the vertical line in the rota, and then you have the horizontal, which would be air, earth, which air would then be 1 plus and 1 minus, and earth 1 minus and 1 plus. And that also fits because, the air and the earth, they try to combine they create basically space, and fire and water more time. And so you see that air has to have a mediating component, to touch base with earth.
Yeah.
And earth have to hide a plus in itself, just as air has to hide a minus in itself. So, whereas fire and water are more extremes.
Yeah, that's right.
Very masculine, very feminine. We see in air and earth, although they are masculine and feminine each, they also hide this other, I guess we could use Jung's terminology, they hide a anima and an animus, an inner masculine and an inner feminine.
That's right. Yeah, one of the other things we haven't talked about, of course, is the symbols themselves traditionally for these elements, and traditionally one of the symbols for Earth was a downward facing triangle, so the point is facing downwards with a line through it. And the symbol for water was just the downward facing triangle. The symbol for air was a upward-facing triangle with a line through it, and the symbol for fire was just an upward-facing triangle. So it points. They're almost like arrows pointing to the where these elements reside in nature. But what's interesting is if you combine all of these 4 symbols together, you get what's traditionally known as the Solomon's seal or the Shield of David, the 6-pointed star.
Right.
You know,
And we all know that God created the world in 6 days. That's like the above connecting with the below. It's the completion.
That's right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
perfection.
Right. Yep. And it's, you have the as above, so below there, but with the 4 elements combined.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
I think also we should mention that we have, in Theosophy, we have the concept of the 4 bodies, right? Then we have the causal body, which is obviously the fire. We have the mental body, air, feeling body, water, and the biological body, which would be earth. But I think an easier way for people to understand this fourfoldness is to use a very modern, contemporary. I suggest this. I won't say like it's waterproof, but consider this. What if the keyboard and the screen has to do with fire because it's the tool for the will, right? It's the user. The user gets an impression and then it expresses. And then you have the software, which is the informative contents, air.
Yeah.
Then you have the electricity, which is igniting the machine, the computer, which would be water, like life force. And then you have the hardware, which would be the physio-electronical components, earth. Do you think that fits?
Yeah, I think
as a metaphor?
I think it definitely fits. And that also reminds me of something related to sacred architecture in terms of how a lot of temples are built. One of the things that, for example, you'll find if you go into a cathedral, like the cathedrals of Notre Dame, they're set up like a human body. So,
right,
when you go in, the baptismal font is at the area of what would be like the belly button. And of course, that's where the water elements are, right? And that's where they do the baptism by water. Right. And then the choir is at the area of the lungs, right? This is where, of course, you take the big breaths and you sing out, which requires air. And the priest speaks from the area of the heart. And then the sacrament is kept at the area of the head of the church. And that's also where they have all the candles. So that's where they have all the candles lit for fire and to light up and to celebrate where the sacrament's kept for the Eucharist, And so it's, and then as you leave, the church, you go through the arch, which is the birth canal, So you're being born from Our Lady, right, as the Christos, right? So, but the point is that the church itself was set up mirroring the human body and incorporating these elemental aspects to it.
Don't you think they got the builders, the Templars, or the original Masons? Well, I say the Templars because they were the architects, even if the Masons were the builders. Yes. Don't you think they got this from Egypt? Because Schwaller de Lubitsch has proven that those temples were also a template of the body.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's the same. I think it's the same thing. And by the way, from even within like the Islamic tradition, if you go to a mosque, you leave the outside world, which represents earth, and you enter into usually a courtyard or an area where you do ritual lustration of washing your hands and your face and your feet with water, right? So this is the water stage. And then you move into the mosque from there, and you have the area where you do the your actual prayers, where you do you're calling out to prayer, and there's lots of
that's a word, right?
Prostrations and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of getting the body moving and getting the breath going for that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But of course you're praying towards Mecca, where they usually have in the direction of Mecca at the front of the mosque. That's where they have the oil lamps, or they have some sort of light that represents the direction you're praying. But it's the fire. It's there. So it's the same thing. You're going from earth to then the area where you wash yourself, which is water, to the area where you're calling out to prayer, and you're going through these deep breathing exercises as you're doing the prostrating yourself on the ground and such, but you're praying towards the fire. So it's
and in all tradition, they not only do they have some kind of fire as a symbol of the one, we said fire is one, but they often direct it towards east, which also, if you go back to the directions, is a symbol of fire.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
And by the way, we could also say that if you take the seasons, you could say that you have fire, spring, air, summer, water, autumn, earth, winter, okay, and child, youth, maturity, old age. But then what about the fifth element? And we're going to get soon to the fifth element. But I would say ether is death, which is the liminal phase, liminal time.
Yeah.
So we have room even in time, in season, and in life stage for that phase. And you can also say it's connected to the now. If you divide like the day into the four, then you could also say the fifth element. Actually, let's take that now, because the fifth element, there's a confusion there, because people don't understand that the fifth, there's actually kind of two fifth elements, or two stages of the fifth element. First, you have the fifth element as archer, as an archetype, as the seed before number one. Like if number one is a circle with a dot in it, then just a circle, God sleeping before awakening, is like kind of a fifth element in a way, but that's the seed, that's in the before stage. And then we get back to it after we have balanced the four elements, which is very important in all systems operating with the elements, to find the perfect balance. It's like the cross, right? How can you get the rose to blossom? You need the cross to be, the rota to be firm,
that's right,
and balanced, and then harmony. Then the seed becomes the flower. So you have the fifth element as a end stage and as a beginning stage.
Yes.
Comment?
Yes. The idea was, if we look at it from a quantum physics standpoint, I mean, it's the ether, or the quintessence, is like the quantum field that the other elements manifest out of.
Good point.
It's like the so it's what they come from, and it's what they return to.
Right.
It's the ultimate source of mind. It's the source of soul. It's it's almost like the sea that the elements precipitate out of, if you will. And so all these four elements they almost like condense out of ether, and then they return to the ether, the quintessence. And by the way, it was called quintessence because it just meant fifth.
Right.
So it was the fifth essence, or the fifth element is quintessence.
Yeah.
But it was, or ether was another name for it, or akasha was the...
Yeah, in the East.
The Sanskrit name for it.
Do you know what akasha means, etymologically? I read it, but I forgot it.
Yeah, I can't remember, to be honest. I mean, I know the Sanskrit was, was, I think it just meant, I mean.
Well, I can tell you what ether means originally in ancient Greek, because that's a clue, and that means divine fire.
Yeah, divine fire, that's correct, yeah.
Not the vulgar fire. And you can see how the fifth element operates compared to the four. Let's take the moon phases. You have the first, the second, the third, and the fourth moon phase, right?
Yeah.
Then you have the eclipse as a symbol of the fifth. If you have child, youth, maturity, elder, then you have death. If you have spring, summer, autumn, winter, then you have the pole.
Yes.
So it's always this... Yeah, that's why I suggested the now, the eternal now. It's like it's the essence, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I think the word akasha, I mean, it would be equivalent to what we would associate with spirit or,
Right.
Something of that nature.
Terminology is hard. The Greeks said soma was the body. They said pneuma was the life force.
Right.
They said psyche was the consciousness, and nous, the spirit or the soul. Probably better to say the identity. So there will be different terminology, but I think a clue is to go past the terminology and identify the principles again.
Right.
Like, for example, I mentioned the Pythagoreans. Okay, let's take mathematics. We have, again, this fourfoldness there. I mentioned double plus and double minus. Well, the minus is the feminine principle because it collects, it reduces, it tries to center. The feminine principle is about going back to the one.
Yeah.
Man stretching up, like in Michelangelo's picture. The left pointing finger is man stretching up to God.
Yeah.
And the right pointing finger is God coming down to man. So that's the masculine principle. That's going from the center to the...
I think that's really good.
Horizon. And you see that in the symbols of Mars and Venus, which are symbols of male and female. Mars is a circle with an arrow going out of it.
Yeah.
So it suggests the masculine principle tries to explode borders. It's centrifugal, and it tries to push limits. So it's going outwards, out in the world, conquer the world, right?
Yep.
If you look at Venus, it's a cross and a circle. If you put the cross into the circle where it really should be,
yeah, we got
then
it.
you see it's seeking center, seeking harmony, seeking going back to the roots or to the balance. And in mathematics, you have the same thing. I said in part 1, I said for the 4 suits of the ordinary cards, I said if I give you one, you can deduct the rest. Same here. If I say that multiplication is fire, because multiplication is masculine because it's trying to create more of stuff. Yeah. So it's going out from the center and out in the world. Then the opposite of multiplication is obviously division.
Division, right.
Right? And that has to be water, because that's the opposite of fire. So division tries to come back to as little as possible, back to the one. Not one to the many, but from the many to the one.
Yeah, I understand.
Then they said that addition is air. It's another way of multiplying or making more of stuff. But this time you add.
Right.
And that fits air too, which is very analytical. It kind of goes in and it analyzes stuff. That means it regards more and more stuff. Yeah. So the opposite of air is obviously earth, which is subtraction. And there you have, right? So you see the parallels.
Yeah,
multiplication, addition have something in common. They're creating more. Yeah. Division, subtraction has also something feminine in common. They create less.
Yeah.
And so there you have more clues to understand the 4 qualities behind the elements.
Yeah, I agree. No, it's very good. I think it's, well, and, it was interesting in both the Eastern and the Western systems. There's this idea that the root of all this, the ether, or what in the Eastern traditions they call the akasha, contains within it a consciousness itself. I mean, it is the essence of consciousness itself, and this consciousness gives birth to these states of identification, which are associated with the elements. So So, but the consciousness exists first. It's not like the consciousness is coming out of the elements, but rather the elements are coming out of the consciousness.
Important point.
Yeah, so it's in some ways you can look at it as the ether is almost like the Force in Star Wars, right? It's like Force in Star Wars. This force that binds all things and that all things come out of, and
that's not a random comparison, because we all know Joseph Campbell was a consultant, right? And he was a myth researcher. So he took what's already out there in reality and put it into this fiction. So it's a fully tight comparison.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you look at like the Eastern traditions where they talk about the Akasha that has the Vijnana in it, which is the consciousness. It's no different than the idea of the Force that is this presence that contains within it this consciousness where you can know things. I mean, it's the same idea. I mean, that was incorporated into Star Wars, but you find it in the Western traditions as well, with the idea of the ether or the quintessence, which is this consciousness source.
What role does that have in alchemy?
The ether?
Yeah, the fifth element.
It's the ultimate transmuting agent, right? Because everything is within the ether. It's all within this field of consciousness. So just as you can change your thoughts, you can change matter, is the idea. You can transmute matter, from one state to another, just as you can change your thoughts from one state to another, because it's all within the consciousness field of the creator. So you can think of like the ether is like the consciousness matrix of the mind of the creator. And out of that consciousness matrix comes all the elements which give birth to everything. So as long as you understand that matrix, you can change the elements around to change the thoughts of the creator, in a sense, or the creator can change his thoughts and reorder creation. So,
yeah, we know, as above, so below suggests a holographic principle, like fractals, like zooming in, then you see a repetition. It's not identical, it's a new constellation of the same principle. It's like a new picture using the same elements in the picture. So it's not like the identical images for every level, but new images by the same elements, building them up.
That's right.
And I gave an example of that because I said that senses would be equivalent to Earth, and then we zoomed in on the senses and we regarded taste, and I said that was equivalent to water in Earth, if you like.
Yeah, that's right.
And we zoomed into taste, and we got the 4 tastes.
That's right.
That I listed, right? And we can do that manifold. I'll give another example of that. I mentioned the Greeks talked about soma, pneuma, psyche.
Right.
Now, just to recap, psyche is the consciousness frequency. You have the causal body, will. You have the mental body, thought. You have the feeling body, the mental body contains thoughts. The feeling body contains emotions. And I also mentioned soma, by the way. I said that's a biological frequency. I said it has an atomic structure, which is cardinal. It has a molecule structure, which is, what you call it in English, steady.
Yeah.
Cardinal,
yes,
mutable, and what's the one in the middle called?
Fixed.
Fixed. Yeah. So the molecule fixed, and then you have the cellular, which is mutable or flexible. But then you can zoom in on pneuma, which is the life force frequency, which is interesting because that deals with energy. So first you could say you have causal vitality.
Yeah.
There you can say you have arrangement, static vitality, which is cohesion, and dynamic vitality, which is in English called driving power, motive power, driving force, impetus.
Yeah, motive. Yeah, right.
And it's interesting because the singular principle of fire is causal, it's initiating, and it is directing. Yeah. Air is dual, static, circulating and maintaining. Water is trigonal, dynamic, pulsating and exchanging. Earth is quadruple, manifesting, living and receptive.
Interesting.
So, and just to explain this, if it's very esoteric, people, initiating or directing vitality is energy that streams up and down. Circulating, maintaining vitality is which is adhering the body together. So circulating. Pulsating is exchanging vitality. That's interaction within and without. And then you have the particular energy manifesting, which is expression. You can define it as matter. And so you can zoom in and you can zoom out like this again and again and again, and you will notice, like the hologram, 4 principles repeating themselves again and again and again. That's just an example. Yeah? Shoot.
Well, I was just going to say, you reminded me when you started talking about mutable and fixed and all this, you reminded me too of something we haven't discussed, and that is the astrological systems of astrology in which...
Let's hear examples from astrology.
Well, I was just going to point out that the course within astrology, there's the 12 astrological signs. Each sign is ruled by a different planet traditionally in antiquity, but each sign is also associated with a particular element. And which have an influence on the nature of that particular sign. And right. So it's just another level of that classification, I guess, is all I was trying to... for example, I'm a Virgo, which is Earth. But their point is that they are all divided according to these different natures. Some are more water natures, some are more air natures, some are more, and surprisingly, some of them like Aquarius, you think of being, maybe water, because you think of aqua with Aquarius, but it's actually an air sign.
Yeah, that one is a tricky one.
Yeah. Whereas Pisces, for example, is water, because, of course, fish swim in water,
Yeah.
And, So,
but you said something important. You said earlier today, you said 3, you gave an example of 3 times 4, one of the Platonic solids. And that's astrology, because the 12 signs you pointed out now are each their element, which is 4, right? Yeah. You can divide it into 4. Yeah. But then they have each their quality that triggered this association, which is the fixed, the mutable, and the cardinal. So each of the sign is both divided into 3 qualities and 4 elements.
Yeah.
And that gives 12, the full cycle, like in every vibration, 7 whole notes, 5 half notes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, just like I started, my mind started wandering on the Greek, some of the Greek god associations, because they were associated with the elements too. Like they had, for example, Zeus was associated with like the 5th element, right. And Kronos was associated with the fire, and Hades was associated with air. I'm sorry. I take that back. Aries was associated with fire. Dionysus was associated with air. Kronos was associated with water, and Hades was associated with earth.
Well, who was with air again? Because the sound got bad when you said that.
Dionysus.
Ah, Dionysus.
Yeah.
And by the way, you never completed the symbolist explanation. I think we went off on a tangent. Could you go back to that? You said that Earth was a down-pointing triangle.
Yeah. Earth was a down-pointing triangle with a line through it.
Right.
So, yeah.
And in Sanskrit, which what do they call it there?
What do they call the
Terra.
For Earth?
Yeah.
So each of the different elements had a different name, and in Sanskrit, the word for Earth is Prithvi.
Mm.
And it's they have similar symbols. Ironically, well, not ironically, maybe it's particularly closer to in a lot of the Buddhist depictions of Earth from both both in the Sanskrit and the Tibetan. Mm. It's usually depicted as a square. Mm. And of course that's geometry. It's sometimes depicted, material things are sometimes depicted as a square too, just because that's where we get the term four corners of the earth.
Right. So you say Earth is a downwarding triangle with a line through it. That's interesting because a triangle is 3, but you put another line, that's 4.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. But
so what's the other symbols?
So like the symbol for water is just a downward facing triangle. And that's, you find that in, certainly the alchemical, the alchemical traditions, but, you also find that sometimes in the Eastern traditions as well.
Yeah, give the names for the elements in the Eastern too. You said for earth, but what is it for water?
So in Sanskrit, the word is apas or jai for water. Mm-hmm. In Hebrew, it would be like mayim, which probably has its roots in the Egyptian word mim. Mm. Which is also related to the Phoenician word mem for water. There's kind of a pass on there. I mean, then if you move on to air, the symbol was
they should know the symbol now because you gave in 2 of them, and then they can just reverse it, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I mean,
but tell them anyway.
Well, so the air was a upward facing triangle with a line through it. And
again, duality.
By the way, there's a lot of words too that are associated with air that we don't think of as anytime. In fact, the word spirit. Mm-hmm. Anytime you see the word spirit in Latin, it really related to air. And that's why we have words like aspirant or aspire, or the Latin aspire, meaning to breathe.
Like in respiration. Mm-hmm.
Respiration, right.
You have expire, the final breath out.
Expire, right. The final breath, yeah. So all these words with that spir root is related to air, and this is why, like for example, in oftentimes when the New Testament translations they talk about spirit, they're really talking about air. Mm.
What's the Sanskrit word for air?
The Sanskrit word for air is vayu. Mm. Yeah. And then, so there's different types of vayu. I mean, in some traditions, air, like in some of the Eastern traditions, air is represented by like a half circle with with the curved part on the bottom.
Mm.
And it's also called, like in the Tibetan's traditions, it's called yam or haya.
Mm-hmm.
But it represents air. And then fire, which, is the upward facing triangle. In Sanskrit, it was called Agni.
Like in Agni Yoga, fire yoga.
Yeah, Agni Yoga. That's actually the root of the Greek word ignis. Igni comes from Agni.
Right.
So it was the Sanskrit was passed on to the Greek, which is, pretty cool. Most people don't, they don't think about that. I mean, people in the, particularly in the Western world, we're taught these Greek roots to all these words, but a lot of the roots to those Greek words are actually Sanskrit.
Yeah.
So,
and what about the 4 processes in alchemy? I guess they can be divided into the 4 elements too, right?
Yeah. So, the earth was associated with the raw element.
Is that the same as prima materia?
Yeah. Well, prima materia is like in some ways that's like the quintessence, right?
Oh, okay.
That's the ether,
right?
That it came out of, but
that's a seed before awakening, before the process begins.
Yeah, exactly. All the potential is in there. Just it hasn't been perfected yet.
Mm-hmm. So the raw elements for Earth, okay?
Yeah, and then digestion was associated with water in alchemy. And by the way out of that, in the Pythagorean schools, this was associated with the area, this area of what would be known as the hearers, or the akasamatikoi, the
listeners. Mm-hmm.
Listeners,
Mm-hmm.
And then the air was associated with the mathematikoi, the elect. And
in alchemy?
In alchemy, it was associated with distillation. And then fire was, calcination in alchemy, and it was associated with the gnosis, or the divine knowledge, the light, the light of understanding.
Right.
So one of the things that I think related to this that's also of interest is that I like to talk about is the symbol of Abraxas that's found in the Gnostic traditions. Mm-hmm. Abraxas is this. Abraxas was said to be one of the sons of Sophia, and Sophia was the goddess of wisdom, and she was said to have 4 children. 3 of the children were faith, hope, and charity. Mm-hmm. And the other child was Abraxas. And Abraxas was said to have, he was this funny looking figure with snake legs. And he was wearing an apron around his abdomen. And he was holding a whip in his hand. And he had a rooster head.
Yeah, he's really a weird figure. I've seen him like a hybrid of different elements.
Like a hybrid, yeah. But he really is, his body. The part of the thing that people don't realize is his body is a symbolic representation of these element states, or the states of identification with the elements. So, like, the snake legs represent Earth, right? Because the snake crawls closest to Earth. Mm-hmm. So it represents the earthbound personality and identifying with the Earth. The apron around the waist, the abdomen, represents the first stage of initiation, where we learn to subdue our passions and we learn to get our emotions under control and use them as an energy that we can use to transform ourselves in the world, as opposed to being swallowed up by them. The whip represented the mind and the air, things of the air, because the whip, cracks in the air. Mm-hmm. And the rooster head represents fire, and it represented the calling out to light, because that's what a rooster does when it sees the light of the new day. It calls out to the sun.
Right. Good point.
Yeah. So the body of Abraxas is actually depicting the stages of consciousness development, in order to move through the elements, move through identification of the elements, so that we can, achieve these greater levels of awareness and awakening, and become really, truly self-actualized to who we really are.
Mm. I agree. This can be taken down to a very tangible level, because I'd say that, for example, if you need food to sustain the material body, that's earth. You need water, fluids, to not dehydrate. Yeah. That's water. You need breath, you pointed out, and you need sun. But that's physical. I'd say the spiritual equivalent is everybody needs creativity in order to thrive. You don't have to be an artist or a musician. There's a million ways to be creative, but you have to express. If you don't express it, you will be dead inside. You have to have a way to express that creative, that God-like.
That's exactly right.
Aspect, right? If God created man in his image, it really means the creator created small creators. So we have to exercise that God spark in our daily lives to thrive. Then we need meaning. A meaningless life is again a kind of a death stasis. So that's air. You need meaning. But you also need love, which is obviously water.
Yes.
And I'd say you also need some kind of eros, erotic. People who never had that are not whole people. So I'm not saying live like a hedonist, but I'm saying
sure.
but having the opportunity to bond physically with another human being is also very important to thrive. But you can even look at in the physical process itself. First you exercise, which is to destroy the resistance, to increase the system's ability to carry more force. Then you need nutrition, which is to provide the system with the 4 energy sources that will strengthen the degree of the life force. Then you need rest to let the system be at peace so the transmuting processes can unfold. And then you need what I would call balancing, which is to use and direct the energies constructively and intentionally. So you see, again, it's always this fourfold process.
Yeah, that's right.
Will, thought, emotion, and sensation. Or if you like, bioelectricity, gases, fluids, solids. And we didn't even mention this, and this is a serious sin. Both of us know this, and we should have mentioned it, but that's the 4 kingdoms.
Oh yeah, for sure. Oh yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. What are the 4 kingdoms?
Yeah, with the mineral kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, the animal kingdom. Are you talking about those kingdoms?
Yes, absolutely. And the last one, fire, is man.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And that's what distinguishes us from animals. Some people think it's thoughts. No. Animals have thoughts. Anyone who has a dog or a cat can attest to that. And, we've proven that horses can count, even the weirdest creatures can do elemental, rudimental processes of thought. But the interesting thing here is that they say that the mineral kingdom is striving to become like the vegetable kingdom. They're striving to interact with water. The vegetable kingdom is striving to interact with the animal kingdom. They're striving to become movable and develop air thought. Now the animal kingdom is striving to become like a man. And what distinguishes us? It's the creativity.
Yes.
Animals can think, but they don't have the ability to take something from which is not there and manifest it in existence. That's a truly divine ability, and that hints of the fifth kingdom, which is the divine kingdom, right?
Oh, yeah.
Man is, yes, we can think, we can feel, we can move and sense, but we have to practice what will eventually raise us to become Übermensch, which is not in a Nazi sense, but in the ancient sense, right?
Self-actualized,
Yeah, and to use the angelic powers, or whatever you want to call it, to create, to become gods. That's our destiny, not just being animals, but moving we come from the animal kingdom, and we have to apply the divine element in us to become like God, in his image, or whatever you want to say, or like the ancient Greeks said, that an awake man is a god among man.
Yeah, and almost all traditions would say that. I mean, that stage is happens when you apply the creative aspect of the fire aspect of ourselves, and you tap into that universal intelligence, that greater sea of consciousness that's associated with the ether, and you draw that consciousness down and are able to manifest it with your creativity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Very well put.
Yeah.
I see you have cool. You have like the Ayurveda aspect here too in the book.
I did, yeah. I tried to look at both Eastern and Western, aspects of it, and
we can't leave this subject alone without touching or disclaiming the problem with the East. I mean, not all of the East. I mean, Om Mani Padme Hum. Isn't that also an example of the elements?
Another example, yeah. I mean, it's another example of the Buddhist Four Noble Truths of Buddhism are based on the four elements, and the Om Mani Padme Hum are divided, which is within the Tibetan prayer. Well, it's not just Tibetan. It's you find it throughout the East, but it's these four aspects of this prayer were each divided according to the elements. And in fact, when you do the prayer, you do the Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. The last hum is a hung. When you complete it, and that hung itself, the very symbol of the hung in the Tibetan, is the body of it is composed of the four elements with the fifth element, with the idea that it all goes back into that consciousness. So it's there too. It's in the same idea of the elements, and the same alchemy is there within the Eastern traditions, but where things get a little weird is in some of the Chinese systems,
Exactly. Taoism, anti-Taoism. That's always the big problem when people discover the elements. But I learned something different in Tai Chi or in acupuncture or whatever. Right. So have you solved the Taoistic problem? Because I've tried to.
It's a mess. A little bit of
it is.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't tie in exactly, but there are certain aspects that do tie in, and and I also tried to, I definitely tied in the Tibetan stuff.
Yeah, that's compatible. But I suspect that the 5 phases of the Taoists, and don't do this beginner's error, people, to automatically assume that Earth means Western Earth.
Right.
Water means Western. I think you have to analyze the contents to know.
Yeah.
If these can be compared at all, I'm not sure. So I just totally ignore what they call it.
Yeah.
You have to look at the function, right?
Yeah.
To find out which is which. But even so, I'm having problem finding harmony. But then again, I'm not very well versed in Taoism, so. But I'm going to read what you say about it.
Well, the challenge here is, on the one hand, the Taoist system has a lot of things that are identical to what we find in the Western world. They have similar ideas of the division of the bodies, sections of the bodies, which they call cauldrons, that are or bowls that contain these vital forces. Mm. So there's certain things in the Taoist tradition, particularly related to the three cauldrons or bowls, that they're like three that are in the human body, which are, the head, the chest, and the abdomen, and how you have to cultivate each of these, and which are described exactly the same way we find within the Kabbalistic and in the alchemical traditions of the Western world. Because they're very, very much similar to the Kabbalistic ideas, the writings of Pappus. He talks extensively about this, and all these other systems ascribe elements to these different areas, with the generative organs being kind of like the fourth cauldron, if you were going to have a fourth. So it's there. They just don't call it by elemental names, but it correlates exactly. So. Right. They have other ideas, like alchemical ideas, talking about mercury and cinnabar, that are identical, and they have even the use of the mani, which is found in the Buddhist Om Mani Padme Hum. The mani is the precious white stone of enlightenment, and it's the same as the mana in the Western, like the New Testament revelations, and in the Old Testament that Moses was able to extract. But where it gets weird is they have a 5-element system that's based, instead of being based on earth, water, air, fire, and ether, they have a system regarding earth, water, wood, fire, and metal. So it's with the idea that each of these elements are a different nature, and they all feed off of each other.
Yeah, someone told me that the clue to solving this is to disregard the titles, but just look at it not as elements but as phases. And I'm not too into it, but apparently it has something to do with the internal way the body works, the system works, because they're very good at that. We know that from acupuncture. Yes. And by the way, two other similarities is that there was a Tai Chi, or a Qigong, if you like, in ancient Egypt and ancient Greek, which is died out by now. But apparently there was some disciplines there. And if you look at the Taoist principles of of balancing, it's the same as in the ancient Greek of harmonizing.
Yeah.
And Buddha, I say Pythagoreanism, Buddhism, and Taoism, I've said this many times in our shows, are pretty similar philosophies.
Very much so.
But then you have this problem of the 5 phases, or the 5 elements.
Yeah, they're more like I heard it described that it's the describing how the motion of energy travels based on how one pulls the energy out of the other. In order to create new states of being. So instead of them being, they're more like hallmarks of how energy manifests, and they're symbols of themselves. So it's not like metal is like all metals are a particular state. It's more like energy can behave in a metallic fashion, It's not, instead of energy turning into water, it's more like energy can behave in a flowing fashion. Wood, is a growing fashion. It's all, it doesn't correspond exactly,
No, but you know what? I wonder if there is a potential reconciliation, because Peter Levenda, he published a book a couple of years ago, which was his life work. He's been working on that since he was a teenager. And that is cracking. It's alchemy, but it's internal alchemy, bodily alchemy. And he's using Thomas Vaughan.
Yes.
And he's using ancient Chinese and Indian, both Ayurveda and Taoism.
Yeah.
And he's able to show that it's the identical stuff.
Yeah,
he shows it even in picture.
Yeah, it is.
You read the book, or?
No, but I'm familiar because I've studied the texts of both. I mean, absolutely.
Oh, right.
I mean, there are ancient Chinese depictions of processes that are identical to what we find in the Western alchemical tradition. I mean, a good example that I like to use that somewhat relates to our discussion today is actually in the Western tradition of alchemy. There's a depiction of a figure that's known as the Rebus. Mm-hmm. And the Rebus is like a hermaphrodite, right? That's part male and part female. And it represents the dualities that come together in order to create this alchemical stone. And, there's been a number of, this alchemical stone is all the elements come together with this dual nature. There's been a number of people who have tried to speculate on where does the term Rebus come from? Mm-hmm. What's the origin of it? And some say, it may, because alchemy seems to be an alchemical Egyptian science, it probably goes back to Ra and Bes. And then that became Rebus,
right.
But I personally, I don't think that's necessarily the origin of it. I think the origin of it actually goes back to the Vedic tradition. Mm-hmm. In the Vedic tradition, the Rebus were the guards that guarded the sacred nectar of immortality that were that was owned by Indra. So in the Vedic, the Sanskrit texts, Indra had this sacred nectar of immortality, and it was guarded by these beings that were known as the Rebus. And Indra was the twin brother of Agni, the god Agni, who was the god of fire. So, contained within this allegory is this idea of so Agni's twin brother, the god of fire's twin brother, is Indra, mm-hmm. who has this secret elixir of immortality that's guarded by the Rebus. And all of these motifs are found within the depictions of the Rebus within the Western tradition as well, which leads me to believe that this is really coming from the Vedic traditions.
Yeah. Well, Peter, I don't think he said where it comes from per se, but he proved that there was even the formula was identical. Yeah. And I'll get his book also, and I'll study these. He even found two pictures, one from Thomas Vaughan and one from Chinese. Yeah. That just recently has been published because there's so much material in the East that hasn't been translated to Western yet. But when he did that, you could see step by step identical, and that means that maybe we can crack this code of which is which of the five. Yeah. But I think it's pretty interesting when I see in your book, when you deal with the fifth, again, the fifth can be the ether when it's in primordial state and quintessence when it's in a harmonious state. And you call it Akasha from the Indian. But if you look at the symbol you chose there, you actually chose the wheel, the Buddhist wheel, right? That's right. The eightfold.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's the same symbol. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, so it's all, it ties in. I mean, the alchemy in the Indian epics was called Rasayana, and it was, they describe the exact same processes that we find in the Eastern or in the Western traditions. What it suggests to me, I mean, you find the same operations in, the Eastern, the ancient Vedic, Sanskrit traditions you find as in the Egyptian, which suggests both of these ancient, and in the Chinese, ancient Chinese, which suggests that all of these ancient civilizations were passing on something. They were passing on the same information. And they were even using the same words for a lot of the operations, which means that they had inherited it. They had all inherited it, or they were all in a lot more communication with each other. Yeah. Historians tend to acknowledge, Yeah. I mean, even the story of Agni, who I mentioned, so Agni means fire, but it was also a god of fire in the Sanskrit Vedic traditions. He was sometimes associated as like a bird man who brought fire from the gods to humans. In a very similar way to the story of Prometheus. Yeah. Within the Greek traditions, So it's we're seeing similar patterns and describing similar processes using the same elements all over the ancient world, which suggests, again, that either there was a lot more communication between cultures than we give them credit, or they had all inherited something from a previous civilization. Or both. Or both. Yeah, or both. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you touched something important there, because we have the language problem, but even within a language we have the same problem repeating itself in terminology. Yeah. And that's where people get confused. So again, this is symbolism, people. So there's no avoiding it. If you want to understand reality, you have to go into its deep, and deeper than words or symbols. That's the deepest language. That's the language of fire, if you like.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
And that will trigger your intuition. Words will trigger your understanding, but symbols will trigger your intuition. So
that's correct. Yeah.
Really recommend that, for example, if you get Timothy's book, where he outlines, like he's illustrated today, different aspects, different approaches, different traditions, pretty basic, broad introduction, and that will help you in your further studies of these four principles. That you really just need one book, basically, to get them, and that's what the alchemists and mystics called Liber N.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. The Book of Nature.
Yep. Yep. Which both of us have read.
Leap one day. Book of the World. Yeah.
I like the appendix to Libran.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful.
Yeah.
And if we were very mystical and esoteric today, I can reconcile the more scientific minded that you even devote a chapter to. Because science has also played with this thing, and you mentioned Einstein, you mentioned Tesla, you mentioned Reich. All these people have explored it. So it's tangible, it's physical. It's not just a theory. It's something that's permeating everything.
Yeah, that's right. Again, what we call ether, or what the alchemists called ether or akasha, is no different than what's now called the quantum field. They just renamed it.
Right.
But it's the same thing, so.
Yeah. Again, language, terminology, Babel's tower, that's our curse.
Yeah, the way you name things gives you permission to identify them with them certain ways, and
well put.
And the way we put letters together to form words is spelling, which is really related to, creating a spell. In terms of how we do magic to change our environment, right? Our identification with our environment.
Yeah.
So, yep.
Yeah, that just goes to show that etymology is also an important field or approach in understanding. You pointed it out with spiritual, but you can do it with everything.
That's right.
Because when you and the interesting thing with etymology is that you often find spiritual notions at the root of most words.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
That's lovely. Anything to add, or is it a wrap?
I think that's pretty good. I mean, you could talk about this subject for hours and hours and hours and hours. I mean, it just goes on and on. Once you understand the classification and the cataloging of everything and how it all goes back to these four states, it kind of opens your eyes more about the natures of things.
Yeah.
Once you understand the natures of things, then you can influence those natures to change your reality for the better. So
yeah, I agree. Okay, Tim, I think we've done a decent take today. I like our dynamics. I hope it will be received well by the audience. So
it's a lot of correspondences. Well, I think people's, while they listen to it, I think their minds will be going all over the place, which is good.
But the thing is, I have to find an enticing title, because the title is very important.
Yeah.
It gives them a chance, right? They gave this a chance to listen. So I'll ponder out a good title. I would like to play on it like you did. I like your title, but I'll see if I find an approach that can. Hey, before I'll let you go. Also, let's name the book. Okay. Give us the title of the book and what websites people should seek to find your stuff.
So the book is called The Elements of the Elements, and which is a play on this idea that. We take the elementary aspect of the elements, literally, and explore them to within cultures around the world. But the book's available anywhere books are sold. Certainly, it's easy to get it through Amazon or other book retailers. You can find it online. You can also, if you Google Timothy Hogan, you'll be able to find a number of or Timothy Hogan author. You'll be able to find it at this book as well as several other books of mine.
Yeah, nice. Do you have websites?
Well, not really. I mean, I have a Facebook page, and there's a Timothy Hogan author page website through lulu.com.
Yeah, okay. Well, they find that if they Google you, I guess.
Yeah. So... Yep.
Okay. So anything about the orders?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm the Grand Master of several Templar lineages, and I run the Templar Collegia.
Templar Collegia, yeah. And there you work with elements too, right?
Correct, yeah.
It's like a school?
It's a school, and we explore the elements, and we do... experiments with the elements, and we try to understand them better so that we can utilize them in manifesting positive order within our world.
Mm-hmm. Do you even work with alchemy there?
We do, yeah, we do. Both,
nice.
Spiritual, psychological, and physical lab alchemy.
Hmm. Yeah, because they don't exclude each other. Today it's very popular to deny physical alchemy.
Yeah, no.
For the sake of the others. But it's the same principle, just manifested in different kingdoms, right?
That's right. And it's alchemy is the precursor to chemistry, but the difference is that the alchemists always viewed matter as having consciousness behind it. Yeah. And so, whereas the chemists just looked at it as dead matter, the alchemists looked at it as alive, conscious matter. And that's an important distinction, because if we understand it as consciousness is behind it, then it's becomes a mirror for ourselves.
Yeah, expressed in the term hylozoic, right?
That's right.
I love Oliver Costello.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, great stuff, man.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think that's a wrap.
Great. Okay.
So I'll thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's so good talking with you again.
Yeah, really missed it. So come back later for another session.
That sounds great. I'll look forward to it. And thank you for all that you're doing. It's really, your things are so good. Your interviews are so good because they're so thoughtful, and you're speaking from knowledge. So it's really good.
Thanks a lot. What goes around comes around, right? So
That's right.
it will be all good.
That's good. Thank you. Thank you. You take care of yourself.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
So far today, if you enjoyed what you heard, do subscribe to our YouTube channel, or if you're listening in on a podcast, subscribe to us there. Subscription is a very effective way to support us. It strengthens our position and makes a whole lot of possibilities that only numbers can get us. And of course, share the shows with everyone you think could benefit from them or be interested in them. And in the future, we will be covering quote-unquote spiritual subjects, if you like probably 25% of our shows. So more is in the pipeline. And if you subscribe to our website, you will get access to a lot of shows there that is unreleased. So we probably have 20 or 25 unreleased shows. We are supposed to have a buffer of 5, but our bottleneck for release is videos. Now, I encourage you in the comment field under this video or this podcast file to come up with your own observations of the fourfoldness. There's a million that I have in my list that was not talked about today, so who knows, maybe some of those will be mentioned by one of you. So go ahead, folks, let's hear other examples of the fourfoldness. And the more you study them, the more you will understand their inert principles. Remember, one of the biggest clues is the polarity. I should say the double polarity. The polarity of the horizontal versus the polarity of the vertical. And the qualities, whether you call it plus, minus, 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 or minus, plus, you could also say, you could also use cold, warm, dry, and wet in those stead. And of course, the basic of everything. 1, 2, 3, 4. This fourness, this fority, will bring you far when you eventually merge with it. Now, I'll read you some more clues to the elements before bidding you adieu. So listen carefully, because they are embedded into these adages. First, through vibration comes motion. Through motion comes color. Through color comes tone. And this knower is to knowing, just as knowing is to known. That's verse. Knowing is to knower, just as known is to knowing. That's converse. Knowing is to known, just as knower is to knowing. Invertando. Known is to knowing, just as knowing is to knower. Converse of the invertando. And then you have the so-called axiom of Maria, among else a precept in alchemy. 1 becomes 2. 2 becomes 3, and out of the third comes the 1 as the fourth. There is an alternate version like this. Out of the 1 comes 2, out of 2 comes 3, and from the third comes the 1 as the fourth. And this, God dwells in the stone, breathes in the plant, dreams in the animal, and awakens in man. Thank you for listening. I've been your host, Al. Thanks again to my guests, Timothy, and to our supporters and my team. Be seeing you.
Who is number one?